call the meeting to order. Well, join me for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll go straight to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion for the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So carries. No student representatives, so we'll forego that. Board members' discussion. Do you have any updates for us, Aaron, on the legislative?
The only update I have is that they recently released. I'm trying to find it so I can find exactly what it was called. It's like a summary of the upcoming legislation for 2024. They just released that summary last week, and so yeah, it'll be interesting to look through and to go over in preparation for the legislative session.
Superintendent informational items? Required, I can't see up there right now, so no, I lost it on my phone here. Give me just a minute here, get it back up. Then we'll have a motion for the required approvals.
I motion to approve the approvals.
And I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So carries. Superintendent informational items.
Yeah, thank you, President Johnson. I want to start with the board calendar. There's an image connected there. Thalia, who is helping us with today's board meeting, actually put this together for us. There have been some changes. You know, typically the board approves the calendar each year. We try to do that in a way that allows our families and our staff to prepare for the coming year. In bargaining this year, we made some adjustments to the conference days, and so we're putting that in there this time just to give you a chance to look at it, to see if you get any questions from your constituents, and then we'll ask you to approve it the next time that we roll around. But it's a little bit of a different look, but in particular, you should pay attention to the conference weeks, which we've adjusted. And so if you look on there, there'd be an example of teachers working extended days, 2 days those week, 2 days of the week, and then they would get a Friday off. It was in response to a survey we sent out to our families, asking them which conference times work the best, and there was a strong preference for evening conferences. And then OEA did a survey of their members as well to ask them what the most effective conference model was. And so we designed that in partnership with OEA as part of the bargaining session and negotiations. And we assured them that we would bring it to the board for consideration. So we just want you to take a look at that. And then if you have any questions over the next couple weeks, we'd certainly entertain those. The next item is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I worked the last couple weeks with Amy Suarez, our Executive Director of Finance and Business Operations, to talk about budget preparations and where we're going this next school year and the coming school years. And particularly for Director Gerber and Director Pruneda. It's your first time, right? But one of the key factors and key roles of a school board is to set the budget and to determine where we're going to put our resources to get the outcomes we've told our community we're going to deliver on. And you have entered into a particularly interesting time in the state of Washington to deal with budgets. And so before we jump into the presentation, though, just today I got a message from WASA, the Washington Association of School Administrators, and they've created a website to help folks make sense of what is a very complicated program, and that's school budgets. And so these are 4 about 30 to 45 second videos that I want to share with you to let you know what people are thinking about across the state. Yeah, let's play all of them. We don't have audio.
districts. Since 2018, the average cost of electricity increased by 37%. The state is supposed to fully fund the basic costs associated with K-12 education, so why are school districts across Washington talking about big budget cuts and funding shortfalls? The fact is, the price of things that schools need to support students has skyrocketed, but the money schools get from the state isn't even close to keeping up. One example is the cost of utilities. Just as your utility bills have increased, so has the cost for school districts. Since 2018, the average cost of electricity increased by 37%. The price of natural gas for heating increased by 62%. Learn more about the other factors taking big bites out of school budgets and what can be done to help at waschoolfunding.org. The state is supposed to fully fund the basic costs associated with K-12 education, so why are The state is supposed to fully fund the basic costs associated with K-12 education, so why are school districts across Washington talking about big budget cuts and funding shortfalls? The fact is, the price of things that schools need to support students has skyrocketed, but the money schools get from the state isn't even close to keeping up. One example is transportation. Fuel costs in our area have gone up 39% since 2018. This has resulted in $80.7 million in statewide school transportation expenses left unfunded by the state in just 1 year. Another example is staff salaries. The average salary for teachers has increased by 61% since 2017, yet state funding has increased by less than 18%. Learn more about the other factors taking big bites out of school budgets and what can be done to help at waschoolfunding.org. The state of Washington is supposed to fully fund the basic costs associated with K-12 education. It's a responsibility identified in the state's constitution. So why are school districts across Washington state talking about big budget cuts and funding shortfalls? One major factor is insufficient special education funding. Special education is a state and federal requirement. But in the 2022-23 school year alone, it was underfunded by nearly $530 million statewide. Many school districts have to use local enrichment levy funds to fill the gap. Learn more about the other factors taking big bites out of school. The state of Washington is supposed to fully fund the basic costs associated with K-12 education. It's a responsibility identified in the state's constitution. So why are school districts across Washington state talking about big budget cuts and funding shortfalls? The fact is, as Washington state's overall budget has grown, the percentage dedicated to funding K-12 education has lagged. Washington currently ranks well below the national average for investment in K-12 education. This core issue needs our attention. Learn more about the other factors taking big bites out of school budgets and what can be done to help at waschoolfunding.org.
All right, any general reactions about those 4 short videos? Or comments or questions?
Well, it explains a lot of these budget issues we're seeing around the state, right? And so not just for our school district, but everywhere. Yeah.
The staffing has 61% increase over the last few years.
Yeah, the post-McCleary decision and the impact on staff salaries, and certainly in most school districts, and around 85% of your budget is human resources, it's staff. It's certainly a significant portion of it.
Not even just staff, just everything, like electrical, gas. I mean, basically everything has gone up. And have they said anything? Are we supposed to be seeing any kind of increase come this next school year?
In those costs?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So we've had those same experiences in insurance, covering those kinds of costs. Certainly fuel and transportation, we're all experiencing that. So not unusual for schools in Washington, and certainly not unusual for the Othello School District. So apart from all of those scenarios and what is really happening and impacting schools, I'm going to talk to you about another one that's not just about Othello, but certainly a factor we need to consider on top of all of these that I wanted you to be aware of. And when you're preparing a budget, it's really a time to give you as much information as possible, particularly for the new board members, so that you understand the process and you have as much clarity as you need, because you're going to be making an important decision. And also in the summertime here, it's a little bit of long-range planning, right? We have some lead up to when Amy Suarez and her team, they've prepared the budget already, a draft, and submitted it to the ESD and Pasco to be reviewed. It'll come back. There may be some recommendations. We'll adjust it, and then it'll be presented to you and presented to the community. But we want to share one factor with you. So the next page, I wanted to include some headlines from across the state of Washington, and if you will notice we'll send you a link to the videos that I just shared with you. On that landing page from WASA, there's a very similar link to a number of articles across the state. And I think WASA is doing a good job of highlighting that this is not an isolated experience. It's every school district in Washington that is wrestling and struggling with these things. But you all, as elected officials, all politics are local, right? What's it mean for us here in Othello? But I wanted you to be aware that this is happening everywhere, and we're looking to those folks to help support us in ways we can support them and how we're dealing with these concerns. So on the next page, what you'll see is a sort of a step back in time to before Director Gerber and Director Pruneda and Director Baginski were on the board. And we ran a levy in 2023. And we told our community we're going to collect this amount of money. And you can see those values listed there in the middle of the page. 2024, 2025, and 2026, we're going to collect this amount of money. It's a fixed amount. Think of that as if you had a fixed mortgage rate. I locked in at 5%, and I'm stuck at 5%, not a variable one, right? It's fixed. And so we locked in on an amount. We're going to collect this amount of money. And those amounts are driven by property values, right? Whatever our property's worth, whatever it takes us, whatever rate it takes us to collect that amount of money, that's all we're going to collect. So in 2024, we're not going to collect any more than $2.825 million. We're locked in there, okay? So then, on the next page, what you'll see is when we were calculating all that and doing that work around the budget, we projected how much levy money we're going to collect. So that fixed amount, there you can see the 2.825, right? And then I've used colors here to draw your attention to dark green. That means fixed. It's static. That's the amount of money we're going to get from our community. Now, the bar on the right is levy equalization money, which comes from the state of Washington. It's still money. It's still green, but it's more dynamic. It can go up or down based on your property values, and I'm going to show you what has occurred here in Othello. But those are the two portions that make up our total levy allotment. So for this 2024 school year, it would be approaching, what is that, $8.5 million, right in that ballpark, right? And here's what a levy is. A levy, it was designed in the late 80s in Washington to help property poor districts that couldn't generate enough funds because their property values weren't high enough and would put an undue burden on taxpayers. So it really is a way to spread out the cost across the state. Now that fourth arrow there is very important. When you levy your community and your taxpayers at $1.50, that's an optimum number. The state is saying you have some skin in the game at the maximum amount, and we're going to throw the maximum amount in. You want to hit $1.50. And if you do that, Thalia, if you'll go back to the green slide really quick, that one. If you'll hit $1.50, we're going to give you everything that light green bar says. If you don't, we're not going to give you that amount. And so we're going to show you what has occurred in Othello and in other places across the state. Now, this can be good news, bad news. If you're a property owner and you're thinking about your net worth, you can see what the property values have done in our community and in our county and where they're headed. Significant increases in assessed value across the state. And the amount that you get levied on your taxes is based on the value of your home, right? The value of your property. So you can see what's happened in Othello and you can see what's happened in other parts of the state. Next slide. So here's what that meant for us. We asked our voters, we told them we're going to collect $1.50 up to $2.825 million. Well, we didn't need to collect $1.50. We're going to only need to collect $1.23 because property values have gone up. Make sense to you? So, what did the state say we need to do to ensure we get the maximum of that light green bar? What do we have to do? We have to collect $1.50. Are we collecting $1.50? We're not. So what would you expect to happen to that green line?
They're
it's going to come down. So here's where we're at. We had projected, so these dark green bars were the light green ones, okay? We'd projected we were going to collect 5.8 million. Because our property values went up and we didn't tax our folks at the $1.50 amount, we had a fixed total amount we were collecting, not a fixed rate. Because of that, that's the impact on the local levy, and that's what we're projecting moving forward. So you can see that it had a significant impact. Now, when you go to the next slide, and you add those together, the levy and the LEA, when you add the light green and the dark green bar together, that's again what we were projecting and then what we actually got. So there's a bit of a gap there that we're going to have to deal with and manage. And many districts across the state are dealing and managing with not only those components in the videos, but also what I'm sharing with you here. All right, property values have gone up everywhere. Let's take a breather for a second. Are there questions?
So, is this problem going to continue?
Well,
Well, I guess because you said 2025. This is set for 25, 26. So, are we going to keep seeing that problem?
yes,
for the next
it's
3 years?
going to remain a concern through the life of the levy, and so it'll again another important task that boards have is to pick a particular strategy for what we want to do with levies and bonds. What happened at the time of this levy, we were calculating what our voters could tolerate if we decided to run a bond. So you have to make that consideration, because when you think about your taxes for schools and you see that $1.50 amount and then it drops to 99 cents, stacking another 50 cents on top of that as part of a bond, maybe you'd support that because, well, my taxes are still flat. That's the strategy that many boards use. That's the strategy that our board uses. It's not out of line. It's good practice. But we are going to have to deal with this through 2026 for sure. And then there'll come a time in the fall where we'll begin, not this fall, but the next year we'll be talking about a levy campaign and going out for a replacement levy, and then thinking about what's going to happen in Olympia. Many of those comments from those videos are targeting Olympia, right? WASA is a lobbying organization for school administrators, and not unlike WASDA. They're out there telling the story of school districts and asking the legislators to think about how can we support our schools and how do we fund them adequately.
So, just out of curiosity, if we got to do that 25, 26, can the school district handle that, or are we going to end up on one of these second
Yeah.
pages where we're Washugo budget cuts, threats, dual language programs in
Yeah.
elementary schools?
Yeah, and I think if, a lot of folks will come to me and talk about the loss of a local newspaper, right? We don't have the Outlook anymore. When I was a kid, we had the Outlook and stories could come in. And I think about if the Outlook still existed, do you think 5 or 6 months ago when we had to make a very difficult decision about elementary art, that would have been in the paper? Probably would have. It would have landed there. Certainly Moses Lake is feeling that with some of the turmoil they've had to deal with. They have a local paper. It's there all the time, right? So we've already been in the headlines. We just don't have a paper. There are certainly impacts we've felt. We had a strong plan this spring with OEA to deal with some of the adjustments we made, particularly at McFarland and at some of the other schools. But more of that is coming. So absolutely, we would have already been on this list, JR, and what we want you to be prepared for is how we're thinking about the next 2 years and why we're in a position to manage and deal with it. Because boards in the past, and this board as well, has been prudent with that reserve and hanging on to some of that funding.
So is there any way for, let's say we're collecting $1.23 and I know it's a fixed deal. Couldn't we go back out and tell the taxpayers, hey, for the 25, 26 season, is there any way to be able to hit that $1.50 so that we can get the optimal money from the state?
Yeah, there are certainly ways to run additional levies. You'll see communities that run technology levies. We're only going to collect 25 cents, and it's only going to be used for technology infrastructure. They'll use capital levies, a lower threshold to pass, You don't need the 60%, you just need 50 plus 1, right? It would certainly be part of our strategy and something to think about. The concern becomes, hey, I just voted for a levy in 2023, and now I'm voting again in 2025, and then I've got to vote again in 2026. Those things begin to pile up in a voter's mind. So there is some strategy around it. But, and I'm not, I guess one thing that Amy and I could check on, I'm not certain the state would allow us to go levy another amount and combine those. That, I just don't know the technical piece of that, but I'll find out for you.
Yeah, because at this point, I mean, it was great when they did it, but the rise of everybody's homes, and if the state isn't going to do anything, I'd like to try to get ahead of it sooner than later.
Yeah, and I think there are so many school boards and school superintendents looking to Olympia. I know that we've arranged a time to meet with a couple representatives at the end of the month to share our story. And the more that we can do that, and hope that those folks take some action. Because again, when it hits your hometown newspaper and it's across the state, voters expect you to react. The last slide really is just a series of talking points, and I think a high-level view for board members. So this is new for us, but I want you to know it's a pretty common experience. It's why we provided those headlines. And again, I appreciate the support of WASA in sharing that video today. But it's a new experience for us, and so we have to consider anything that's coming our way. Now, what makes Amy and I particularly nervous is when you see a budget and it has red numbers. That's going to be a new experience for a number of people in our community, and perhaps certainly for some of our board members who haven't seen those. And are we in a position to withstand some of that by addressing it with the rainy day fund, the reserve, in hopes that in the next 2 years, Olympia takes action and provides additional funding? So compared to other districts and other folks on that list, we feel like we're in an, I would use the word okay position. But we've got to be pretty strategic in what we decide to do. Director?
Like you just said with your rainy day fund, other school districts that didn't have that are the ones that got in trouble faster. Is that correct?
I think I know what some folks did. They used some of the federal ESSER funding that came during the pandemic to fill this gap. And then when that funding dried up, which it has for everyone, that gap had grown even bigger. And so now that's why you end up in the paper with 100 cuts in these large systems. We didn't use our funds on a lot of positions that way, and then we've had the strong partnership with OEA to think about using attrition as a way to move to a sustainable staffing size. So I think that's why we're in a good spot. It doesn't mean we're not going to need to dig into that amount. And another way that it impacts board members, during our policy governance structure, the board established a policy that we would have a minimum of 10% of our budget in a fund balance. And so let's say our budget is approaching $85 million. We've been operating from a position that the board expects us to have $8.5 million in the bank in reserve at all times, right? And for us, that's probably 2 months of payroll. It might seem like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme, it's really just a couple of months. I don't believe it'll be this year, but perhaps next year, if the state doesn't address it, we're going to come right up against that threshold, whether or not we can have that much money in the bank. And so that'll be an opportunity for Amy and I to come to you and say, what do we think about this amount? How do we think about it strategically? Are you comfortable with 7%? What are best practices in accounting? That kind of thing that we're going to have to think through, so we don't. We've got to cover payroll. We've got to cover our expenses for sure.
So I got a question. Why are we waiting to 25 or 26 when, if there's something needs to be done now to try to soften the blow as much as it can or try to save as much as we can? Why are we not taking a little more? Not that we tried to do the best we could now this year, but after seeing this, should we have maybe tried harder? Because we're going to put ourselves in a really bad situation. I'm trying to stay off that blue naughty list.
Yeah, I think it really becomes a balance of how, I use this with my principals all the time, reckless and aggressive. And I think there's a fine line between saying we're going to cut this program or this many jobs so we can keep this much money in the bank, we feel comfortable with where we're at, particularly for next school year, to say we're going to have to go to that piggy bank a little bit, but that's what it's there for. And we're going to hope that we've done a good job of, and boards have done a good job of creating that reserve so that when this moment comes up, we can use it to bridge the gap to when the state's going to react. I think many of us who are working as superintendents or assistant superintendents of finance or directors of business, they're all watching Olympia to say, hey, you all better be paying attention because this is a firestorm across the state of Washington. So where I hope we're at, JR, is you're going to see a budget this July and August that, it might make you sit back a little bit. It shouldn't make you fall over in your chair. It should just make you sit back and say, okay, they're talking about it. We see these things coming. And then it informs the conversations we have with WASDA. It might have informed the sessions that you go to at WASDA. Hey, I'm not going to go to this TNL one. I'm going to go listen to this budget one. When you get invitations from WASDA for regional meetings about school finance, you'll be listening with a different ear. So today was just really about giving you information. There's no action to take, but also what Amy and I are working really hard is to make sure that there are no surprises for any of you or for us. So, if you were thinking about this from this was your own business or your personal finances, this might be the moment where you're at the dining room table calculating your budget, saying, "Oh, we're going to slow down for a couple months, and then we'll recalculate and think about where we're headed long term." So, okay. Any other questions about what I've shared with you today? Well, if you have some that come up along the way, again, I wanted to give you some talking points because I know folks will address you when we're either making purchases or expenditures, or they notice that we're cutting programs or services over the next couple years. And Amy and I will give you as much information as you need so that you can make informed decisions and share with your constituents, okay? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. From there, we will go to policy review. We have some more policies to review. Again, get a chance, take a look at them. Questions or comments, back with them. They'll be up on the next meeting. No public comment. Then we will go on to upcoming events. Or I think the next one is just our next meeting. 2 weeks. Is that also a new? Yeah. Or 1 o'clock meeting? Okay. Then we'll go on to the board self-assessment of the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Perez, for that information on the budget. I know that's usually Amy's presentation, is that correct? But she wasn't here today, so thank you, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of information as well. Also, I really like to put on there, I really like the 1 o'clock meetings when we are able to have them. It works out a little better for me, so I appreciate that.
And why it would be nice to have all 5 board members here. It was very appreciative that we had a quorum today to do today's business.
Everybody be careful with the heat. Drink water and stay inside.
And we always can't forget a good agenda. Quick today. Any other?
Nope.
Any other discussion to bring up? Okay, meeting's adjourned.